Hey guys, it's Brandon. A lot of you have been writing in requesting that I do some videos on the Caro-Kann defense, and so I thought I'd take a look tonight at the advanced variation of the Caro-Kann defense. And what I'm going to do with this video, and hopefully the videos, the other videos that I do in openings, is rather than going into a lot of theory lines that could go as far as 15 moves deep, I'm going to try to stick to as much as possible the general ideas of the openings, where whatever side we're looking at gets its play, what it needs to look out for, what it needs to be careful of, where it should be, directing its forces in the opening, what the general ideas are. And hopefully that will be more instructive than just saying, okay, when this happens, then you do this, and this move, then this move. Hopefully you'll learn a little bit about the principles of this particular opening, and learn that way. So, okay, every Caro-Kann defense begins 1d4, c6, d4, d5, and the advanced variation gets its name because white advances his e-pawn from e4 to e5. So what is this move doing? Well, the first thing it's doing is controlling the f6 square. This is, of course, the place where we'd like our knight to be developed. And since that's being taken away, it sort of restricts the kingside pieces in general. The reason being, if we develop our bishop to f7, for example, or e7, a common place to develop the bishop, okay, where's the knight going? Knight can't go to e7, can't go to f6. You go to this ugly h6 square, and then maybe to f5, but okay, you could get chopped for the bishop, mess up your pawn structure, and if you go knight e7, you gotta sort of block in this bishop. So this simple move, e5, sort of just restricts black's kingside piece development. Okay, well, what are the downsides, and what does black do about this? Well, the most common move here is for playing bishop to f5. And the reason black does this is because he's hoping to get in c6, well, hoping he will get in e6, and what will happen is a pawn structure set up like the advanced French defense, and the difference being this bishop is now outside of the pawn chain and on this nice diagonal, as opposed to in the advanced variation of the French defense, where it's sitting on c8, not really able to do anything because it's blocked in by these pawns. So the most common move here is knight f3, and black plays e6, and so he's successfully accomplished this French advanced setup with the bishop on the outside of the pawn chain. One thing to note here is that the very common technique of knight h4 to try to win the bishop, since it has no line of retreat except to go backwards and trade the knight for the bishop and try to win the bishop pair, doesn't work so long as you keep this d8 h4 diagonal open for either your queen or your bishop, because the knight would just hang on this square if it were to play here. And if for some reason you see that your opponent, you think your opponent is playing moves to prepare this knight h4 move, like maybe even the strange looking g6, to prepare knight h4, you have time to play the move h6, which is important in a lot of Caro-Kann variations and a lot of general chess variations. Well, not a lot, but some. Just to play this h6 move to give your bishop the square h7 to come back and hide away and get away from this knight on. So if you see your opponent preparing this sort of knight h4 move, you always have time to play h6. Okay, but let's get back to general moves here. A lot of times, in fact, the most common move in this circumstance for white by far is bishop e2. This is called the short variation, after Nigel Short, who created it. And the idea is, okay, I'm going to develop the bishop. It's limited to 2 squares of development, unless, of course, the fianchetto happens, but that rarely happens. It's limited to e2 or d3, because these squares are all controlled, of course, by the white pawns. And if he comes here to d3, it's an easy exchange for black. So he plays it to e2, decides, okay, I'm going to hold on, and later on, maybe I can take advantage of these light squares on the queen side, because this queen's light bishop is developed onto the king side and has a lot of difficulty getting back to cover these queen side light squares. So that's the idea here for black, and also for white. And also white doesn't want to promote as many exchanges. Okay, if you do see the move bishop d3 as opposed to bishop e2, just take it. Okay, because once you take it, you have the square f5 now available for the knight. A real strong maneuver would be knight to e5, e7 to f5. It's a nice spot for the knight to sit. Okay, it can be kicked with g4, but not without serious weaknesses coming into play for white. So if you do see bishop to d3, take it. Okay, first of all, you're exchanging, and when you have less space, any exchange is generally favorable because your pieces now have more squares to move around on. And in addition to the fact that it's just an exchange when you're cramped, he's trading his good bishop for your bad bishop. That light square bishop for him is his good bishop because his pawns are on dark squares. For you, it's your bad bishop because your pawns are on light squares. So this is a very favorable trade for many different reasons. And that's, of course, why mostly you see bishop to e2 as opposed to bishop to d3. But, people who haven't studied this opening do play this a lot. And just be happy to trade that bishop as soon as you can. Okay, so that's the first sort of stage of the opening for black. Now what? The idea for black in this opening, and if you take nothing else from this video, you should take that the idea for black after this initial phase of the opening is to attack the d4 point. This is the key sort of point for white. It maintains his pawn structure. It keeps his chain here on d4 and e5, his space. If this pawn were to fall, even if not to fall, but just to be replaced by a piece, this e5 pawn would become very weak all of a sudden. And if you were to be able to eliminate both of these pawns, or just trade them off, then you could push the center and push back, and you'd be the one with space. So the most common way to do that, of course, is c5. And this is also common in the French defense, the only difference being that in the French, you usually get c5 with one move as opposed to the two moves it took to get here from the Caro-Kann. But then on the other hand, in the French, you have a bad bishop. So there's pluses and minuses to each thing, to every move in chess, really. So oftentimes what you'll see here is, c3. White wants to keep a pawn on d4, and pretty easy just to play. Okay, knight to c6. Attacking, adding further pressure to d4. You may see something like bishop to e3, and then I would recommend queen b6, just adding more pressure to d4 and also attacking the b2 pawn. Okay, a lot of times this can be a poison pawn, and white will just let it go and let the queen snatch it, hoping to catch the queen out of space, out of place over here, and hoping to catch black undeveloped. And that pawn may be gambited. But sometimes you'll just see, something like b3. Okay, in any case, we're adding pressure to d4. It's protected enough times. And oftentimes, if white plays correctly, you won't be able to come up with a circumstance in which you can trade off this pawn, where you can win this pawn, or where you can trade it off for having a piece sitting on this d4 square, thus weakening the e5 point. Okay, so now that we've come up with that, we've figured out we've got as many resources on d4 as possible. Well, actually, you could, in theory, you could try to take this knight off with the bishop if you wanted to add a little bit more pressure to d4, but you'd be giving up the bishop pair for that. What now? What does black do now? Well, the idea for black in this case, okay, let's see. Let's just say white castles. The idea for black in a situation where white has defended it enough that he won't be able to replace the pawn with another. He won't be able to force the replacement of a pawn recapturing by a piece. It's okay to just take the pawn anyway. And the reason for that is the third part of this opening. This is where black gets or tries to find some counterplay in the form of the open C file. It's important for black to get a rook to the C file and use that rook, and probably both rooks, just sort of to try to enter white's position on the C file. Okay, white will probably try to contest the C file and won't let you have it for free, but that's outside the scope of the opening, and you have to just sort of play chess at that point. A couple of other things to pay attention to. Your kingside pieces are still undeveloped. At this point, it's okay to play something like bishop e7 or even knight e7 is okay now. Before knight e7, say for example, in this position, it's tough to play knight e7 because then your c-pawn hangs. So it's important to keep this bishop's view of the c-pawn as long as this tension still remains between the d and the c-pawn. But once these exchanges have occurred, now you can work on some ideas for developing your kingside pieces. Okay, one idea might be just to trade this bishop off for the knight, and then play knight to e7 to f5, then bishop e7. Another idea might be bishop to b4, just to get, and then play knight to e7 to wherever you decide is best, and then sort of decide from there. Just the thing to keep in mind is that okay, the kingside pieces come later, and developing the queenside pieces is generally the better strategy in the opening. The reason for this is you can do this and get away with it is because the center's blocked. Okay, when the center's blocked, like I've said, it's harder for white to get an attack on the king, and leaving the king on in the center is often okay when the center is in a position like this. And I've even seen games of Anand and high-level players like this who just don't even castle in variations like this in the Caro-Kann. They'll just leave their king in the center for the whole game because it's so difficult to crack this center and attack the uncastled king. Okay, but castling is also an option. So, but that, of course, will come later. So, general points to remember. Okay, c6, d4, d5, e5, bishop f5. This is the key move, setting up this French defense structure, and without the bad bishop. Then once these moves have happened, okay, if the bishop comes out to d3, don't be afraid to trade it off. And once bishop e2 happens, start your assault on d5 right away. Excuse me, on d4 with moves like c5, knight c6, queen b6. These are all good moves. All standard moves that you see in the French defense also. So, a couple other things to remember. White will be playing on the king side. We'll play with the space on the king side. We'll play for an attack. You got to keep your eye on your f7 square. Watch out for moves like f4, f5 to try to strike at. These arrows are annoying. Just try to strike at your e4. Your e6 base. Moves like f4, f5, striking at this base e6, hoping to open up lines on the king side, are sort of an effective plan for white. The queen can come out here onto the king side and all that stuff. So, okay, after that, we talked about the d4 pressure, applying pressure on d4, and then once the smoke sort of clears with d4, you want to get your rooks and your pieces to the c file and try to create play on the c file. This is where your play is going to come for black. So now that I've sort of gone into the main ideas of this opening, let's take a look at a game that was played in this opening. Actually pretty recently. This game was played with Vladislav Nevednici, Grandmaster rated 2534, versus Alexei Dreyev, who's a very famous Grandmaster and specialist in the Caro-Kann defense, and his rating is 2697. And this game was played earlier this year at the European Individual Championship. So Dreyev playing black, and we got the move e4. Okay, I'm not going to go into too much depth of this game. I just want to point out how these moves sort of occurred in the game and how they fit into the points that I made earlier. So we have e4, c6, d4, d5, e5, bishop f5, knight f3, e6, Okay, this is all stuff we've seen. Okay, bishop e2, the short variation. c5 right away, attacking this d4 point. Bishop e3, defending the d4 point. Queen b6, adding attackers to the d4 point, and also attacking the b2 point. Okay, knight c3. This is an interesting move. It blocks the c-pawn, and that means at some point black can choose to take, and this pawn will be isolated until the f-pawn can somehow get there. Okay, knight to c6. What do we have? Queen b6. Yeah. Knight to c6. A further pressure on d4, and now bishop b5. So here, this idea of taking advantage of these light squares, since this bishop is off on the king side, is sort of coming into play. So white is indirectly defending the d5, the d4 point by pinning this knight, so it's no longer a legal attacker since it can't move. Okay. Black responds with bishop g4. Now this is indirectly attacking the d4 point because this knight is now unable to defend d4 because it's pinned to the queen. So every move for the last, let's see, since moves 5 through 8 for both sides have pretty much, with the exception of knight c3, been about defending or attacking the square d4. Okay, finally white caves in and takes d takes c, and black gets to develop this bishop. And we get a couple more exchanges, and queen d4 is played, which can be played because the queen is unprotected. This take can't happen because then queen takes queen. So the queen has to figure out what it's doing, and if queen takes, knight takes is possible because, of course, the queen is no longer there to be pinned to. So black decides trading pieces. Okay, this is pretty typical of Caro-Kann, especially in the advance. Black is just attacking d4 and trading pieces because he's got less space. But in the meantime, this knight is attacking the c knight, and white is threatening to win a pawn because after either one of these pieces takes and then pawn retakes, the pawn will then fall. So knight ge7 conveniently guards against this threat, and black gets his last piece developed. f3, blunting the bishop on this diagonal, forcing it to retreat so he can get in castles, queenside. Interesting decision. I don't think it really matters. He probably could have gotten away with not castling, but I think I would have castled kingside in this case because of now we see rook coming to c8. And now this rook is coming to c8, defending this knight, and also getting itself on the c-file, like we mentioned, the play coming from black on the c-file. And now the rook is actually pointing at the king. So rook h to e1, centralizing the rooks, and now black castles. So this is move 15 for black, and he finally castles, just to connect the rooks, I suspect. It has nothing to do with king safety. There's no real queens on the board, and there's no real chance for a mate, or at least it's very difficult to mate when there's no queens on the board, especially at this high level. Okay, bishop takes c6, knight takes c6. Some more trades. This can only really favor black's chances for a draw or a win. And knight to b5. Oh, I forgot to mention this in the earlier thing. Another thing that you need to be aware of is the sensitivity of your d6 square. And if you see white in the opening early on play something like knight to c3, he may be thinking about bringing a knight to b5 and then into this hole on c6, which will of course be defended by this pawn here. This move can be easily stopped. In fact, usually when I see something like knight c3 in the Caro-Kann, I just play e6, or excuse me, h6, almost immediately, just to stop knight b5 to d6. And you can play these slow moves because the position is closed and tempos are not so important. So you can sort of get away with not developing and playing one of these a6 moves, type moves, to stop the knight to b5 when the position is blocked up like that. So don't hesitate to do that if you see knight to c3, and then carry on attacking the d4 point. Anyway, bishop g6, just defending this bishop, getting it on this better diagonal where it's pointing at the king. and it's not blunted by this pawn. Okay, knight takes c6, rook takes c6. Okay, of course he's not going to take with the b pawn because he wants to leave the c file open for his rooks. Okay, c3, just blunting this rook's view of the king. Rook to b6, attacking the knight. Knight comes back to a nice square on d4. Rook to c8. Now you see a little theme here. Both of his rooks are either on or have used the c file to get themselves into play. Rook to e3. Rook to a6, attacking this pawn. a3 just to defend it. Of course, king b2 is not, b1 isn't possible here because of the bishop. And that's the usual type of move that you see when people kick queenside castle to defend the a-pawn. So a3 is sort of forced. That sort of weakens these light squares, which black soon takes advantage of. a4. And the king d2 move is played, I think, just to get out of this pin, the pin of the c-pawn to the king, which is a protector of this knight. Okay, it's protected by the rook at the moment, but doesn't want to have, rook takes knight come as a shock, because of this pin. It's generally good if you have nothing better to do and you're in a pin. It's generally good to get out of it. So king d2 keeps an eye on this pawn and also centralizes the king a little bit, gets out of the pin. Okay, king f8, rook to a1. A couple of these moves now, rook to c4. This is an interesting move. It's blockading this c-pawn, and this is really outside the scope of the opening, but in general, white should probably try his best to, well, it's not really a mobile majority, but he's got a queenside majority and may try to create a pass pawn against this kingside majority. Excuse me, against this queenside minority. So it's sort of hard because of the pawn on d4 to create a pass pawn, really for either side. And that's why this position is a draw here at the moment, and continues to be for the rest of the game. Okay, b3 kicking the rook back, b4 kicking him back again. But now, of course, this blockade comes. And so as long as this rook sits on c4, there's no way for this pawn, of course, to move, so there's no way for there to be a pass pawn created. Okay, h4, h5, just some pretty standard moves. I mean, neither side is really doing anything here at the moment because there's not much progress to be made. This position is a draw. And I'm going to go through these moves sort of quickly because there's not much of anything going on here. And the game ends finally with king c1. And actually the scorecard indicates 0-1, a black win. I can only assume that white resigned because their flag was about to fall and they were about to run out of time, because there's no other reason I can see for this resignation. Not Houdini. Chessbase is suggesting rook to the other rook to the c file and then grabbing this knight because this pawn would then be pinned again. Okay, that would be pretty easily avoided. So this position, when I analyzed it with Houdini, and it says it's pretty even. Maybe, I think it said maybe black had like a 0.1 or 0.2 advantage or something, but certainly not something resignable. So I can only assume that his flag was like about to fall, or he was about to run out of time and he just like played a move and then just resigned or something. So anyway, why did I show you this game? Well, I think it was a great example of everything that I talked about in the opening. The things you should be doing. Okay, it was a draw, but the opening only takes you so far in chess. So let's just go over the finer points of that and reiterate them one more time. Okay, things to remember. Bishop on this diagonal. Bishop f5 is your third move. Knight comes out. e6. Okay, in this game, bishop e2 was played. If bishop d3, then don't be afraid. Just take that bishop off. c5. Okay, we're attacking d4. Defending d4. Attacking d4. Okay, this is an intermediate move, and this is the move I was talking about. Okay, knight. You could even play a6 here, just to stop knight to b5 to. Knight b5 to d6 wouldn't really work in this case with this configuration because bishop chops and then queen takes. But just if that's not the case, sometimes in one of your games, don't be afraid to play a6. Position is blocked. you can take. I don't want to say tempos are not important at all, but they're much less important than open games. So knight to c6, attacking d4, bishop b5, pinning the knight, defending d4, bishop g4, pinning the knight, attacking d4. So d takes, bishop takes, queen takes. Okay, some trades. And the key move, rook to c8. Again, reiterating that play for black comes in the form of the c file. Okay, one way or another in the advanced variation, the c file is going to be opened. Either semi-open or completely open. But in one way or another, it's going to be open. And you want to have your rooks there first. And black has the rooks there first in this case. So, some trades. Just, like I said, this position is a draw. But that's, not a bad result when you're black against a strong player with white. So, in your own games, you can look for other ideas, other ways to play along the c file, other ways to attack d4. But, those are the general principles. So I hope you guys got something out of this opening. I hope you enjoyed it, and it was helpful to you in your expansion of your knowledge of the Caro-Kann. And comments and likes are always appreciated. And we'll see you guys next time.